Welcome back to the Reviving Christian Families podcast. I almost said radio. I don't know why. Today we're going to be talking about what to do if you're trying to make those habit changes, implement new routines, new schedules, and your spouse just isn't on board with it. We're going to talk about my experience with that, and I'm going to give you guys some tips. So let's dive in. Hey, spouses. I know what it's like to be frazzled, overwhelmed, and stressed while managing all the tasks, balancing work schedules, raising children, and trying to grow closer to each other and the Lord. All the trauma and the shame cycles you can't seem to break out of are just the cherry on top, right? You know that you want to make a change, that you need something to be different, and you crave a happier, healthier lifestyle, but you don't know where to start, how to get there, and you just feel stuck. That's why I'm here showing up every week with these podcast episodes to give you the knowledge and momentum you need to get unstuck and begin healing the generational trauma in your family. Let's take off those trauma patterns and the lies of the enemy and put on the armor and strength of the Lord. We are building a better future for the next generation and every generation to come. And the healing for the next generations begins with us. So wives, grab your husband, and husbands, grab your wife a snack, and let's dive in and do the work. All right, I am so excited to get to talk about this with you guys because this is important, right? Like, the whole point of this podcast is that we're on the same page as our spouse. We want to be, linked. We want to be working towards one goal, one mind. So if we're trying to improve our family dynamic, we're trying to create new routines, new schedules, new habits, kind of maybe get rid of some of that stuff that's not serving us anymore. And if we're doing all that and then our spouse wants nothing to do with it, it might be kind of hard to create lasting change. So we're going to talk about what to do if that happens. And so I kind of want to start by just telling you that your first step might be listening to the last episode if you haven't yet, because I had my husband on and we talked about what this was like for him when we started, and I even had him give advice to maybe a spouse who is kind of hesitant to it like he was, and what he would say to them now that like we've kind of gotten over that hump. So if you could even have them listen to the last episode with you, I do not have that one recorded in video for those of you who are watching the video of this, but I do have it on Apple Podcasts and all the other audio things. So that's a good starting point. And then the other thing I wanted to do is just kind of share my story with you guys because this happened to me, okay? I started kind of working on these things, and it was discussed between my husband and I. Like, we were on the same page in the sense that we decided things had to change, right? And so we knew that, but he was working. He works usually 10-hour shifts, plus he has like a 45-minute drive or so. So he is gone for like 12, sometimes more hours of the day on his work days, which is like usually 4 to 5 days a week. So sometimes if we get busy, especially if we have like car maintenance that has to be done or like that extra stuff that he does, then I don't get to see him a lot because he does work so much. And that was like kind of how it was during this period of time where I was kind of changing things, is like we were so busy, and so I felt like I didn't ever see him, or I couldn't really talk about it with him. And so I had started a course. Me and my husband decided to purchase a course for me, and it was called Simple Rhythms for Busy Moms. It's still out there. You can Google it. It's by Cayenne. I might link it in the show notes. I haven't decided yet. And so I bought this course because I knew we had moved, and I've been trying to figure it out for some months. I had kind of had like a health issue with my son, and so I had to give him a lot of attention, and it was like stuff with our breastfeeding journey. And so like I was doing like, it was a lot. If you ever dealt with anything breastfeeding and pumping and feeding a baby and them getting behind in weight, I mean, like there's a lot that goes into it and it takes up a lot of your time. So I was very preoccupied after we moved, and it didn't go as planned. Needless to say, there was a lot of things that I wanted to get done in a very shorter time frame that did not get done in the time frame that I was hoping. And so I was feeling a little discouraged, and I didn't want us to fall back into old patterns of living like we were at our old house. And so we were like, something has to change. And I was trying to DIY it all, and it just felt really stressful and hard. And so I crunched numbers and I was like, we can just afford this. Like, and here's how. And I just kind of talked to my husband about it, and he agreed and he was okay with it because it was a investment for our family. So I bought this course and I kind of like focused all of my nap time energy on it for, I can't remember how long it took me. I think it was maybe 2 months to get through it all, but it was something like that. Okay, so, and I just kind of started building these routines and these habits and all of that. Well, I started doing that kind of on my own. I didn't really consult my husband, and we were very busy, so I just kept like having the thought in my head like, oh, well, there's really no time to talk to him about it. But I should have made time, because what happened was he would come home or like he'd be at work and we'd be on the phone, and I'd be like, okay, well, when you come home, like we have a schedule to follow. And he's like, what? And I'm like, yeah, I planned our evening out. And so then he would get home and I'd be like, drill sergeant, I'm like, okay, we got to do this, then we're gonna do this, then we're gonna do this. And he's like, and it was like a shock to his system, because we were used to we would just eat dinner and then we would watch TV, or we would, relax on the couch, like something along those lines. We didn't like keep our evenings busy because he already worked such a long shift on his work days. So we usually saved like the extra stuff for the weekend. But we knew that that wasn't working. Like, at least, some tidying, cleaning needed to be implemented during the week, on those evenings, so that the next day we weren't waking up behind. And so we knew that, but we weren't sure exactly how to do it because he came home so late that it was like we had limited time, it felt like. So I just kind of took it into my own hands to implement this. And so I was like, okay, we got this, then we got this, then we got this, then we're going to bed at 7:30. Like, and he gets home at like 5:15, 5:30ish usually. So like we were cramming a lot in there, and I was trying to make sure the kids got our attention, that the kitchen got reset, that we ate dinner was ready when he got home, and then maybe we had time to relax, but really we didn't. I mean, for probably a couple weeks, I had to like pretty much cut out our TV time entirely, especially just during those weekdays, because I had just packed us so full, and it turned into an argument a little bit, like some bickering, because he obviously didn't like that, and that he just like came home one day and everything was different, and I just like expected him to act a certain way now. And so it was definitely a point of tension in our marriage when I did that. And looking back, I'm like, yeah, I definitely should have made time to talk about all this and give him like my ideas and ask for his input before I just took everything I learned and just threw it into place, all on my own, because it was overwhelming for him. And then it wasn't a team thing. And so what ended up happening was he ended up getting upset with me, and we had a little discussion, and he was like, I was not consulted. And he pretty much told me that he was feeling like I kind of just left him out of the decision, and I did all this stuff on my own, and then I just came in like a drill sergeant and expected him to follow orders. And obviously I don't want my husband to ever feel like that in his own home. And I know I can kind of come off that way for him sometimes, and so I'm glad that he can tell me when I do. And so once I stepped back a little bit and I kind of like looked at everything, I was like, yeah, I can see what you're saying. So then we made it a priority to actually sit down and talk about it together. And so then I kind of corrected my mistake in that sense. Is like, it took us a while, actually, even after we had the conversation, to like figure out when we were going to sit down to do it, because it's kind of like that thing where it's like, it's a little odd. Like, it's not part of your normal routine and it can feel like it's hard to fit in there somewhere. But we did it, and we find a time to talk about it, and we just kind of decided together, like, what do we want this to look like? So I kind of gave him my ideas, and then he would give his input, and we walked through evenings during the week, evenings during the weekend, morning during the weekends. What do we want our TV time to look like on Friday, Saturday, Sunday? And so like that sort of thing, and really talking through like our problem areas, because at this point, we've been doing this. We know where we have our biggest issues. For us, it's like in the morning. And then, like, for a while, our biggest issue was Saturday would sometimes just become TV day. And I didn't like that personally. Like, I'm not a person who likes to just watch TV all day. It would make me feel icky, and my head would kind of get like that spinning feeling, and I would get brain fog. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want that to be part of our normal. I don't want our kids thinking that's okay or watching that much TV. So I knew that had to change. And so we kind of talked about that. And there were some other things too. But like, once you've been lifing with your spouse for a little while, if you actually sit down to talk about it and think about it, I think you'll quickly realize, like, oh, hey, yeah, that's what's not working for us. Like, this is where we have our biggest issues. And that's when you can come up together with a strategy on how you're going to improve that. So that's kind of what we did. And we wrote it all down. It wasn't anything fancy at first. Like, it was literally just lined paper. And I just wrote it down. And I kept it in a binder so we wouldn't lose it. And then now I'm kind of building a fancier binder where I've got like pretty printed off sheets and stuff like that. And maybe I'll do like a home management binder walkthrough in a different podcast / video. But it was, at first it was just completely basic, like just the bare minimum: pen, paper, that's it. So don't feel like it needs to be anything fancy. You could even do this in like a notes app on your phone if that would be easier for you. Like, I know you can share notes, you can share Google Documents. There's so many ways to do it, really. So just finding what works best for you guys. So that's what happened with us. And so now, like, I want to give you guys some advice of what I've learned and some things to do if you feel like, well, my spouse, I don't want to say my husband. For me, it was my husband. But for you, maybe it's like you're the husband and your wife doesn't like change, I'm not sure. So if your spouse is in that spot where they just don't want anything to change, the first thing I kind of wanted to tell you, advice-wise, is just to remember that it's normal. The brain naturally doesn't want to do anything out of its comfort zone, anything out of its routine, anything different. And that is how the brain wants to, that's how it's wired. It's wired to do that. And so the reasoning behind that is because our brain is still pretty much 90% a caveman brain. It is still ready to protect us from the dangers of the outside world. And to the brain, anything unknown, anything different just screams danger. It's just not safe in the brain's eyes. So you have to know that like that is normal, and the brain is designed to do that. But we should challenge it. And so just have grace for your spouse in that. It's not that you have to side with them or agree with them, but you can just like understand, oh, their brain's protecting them and it's very uncomfortable for them right now. If I give them time and I just talk through this with them, encourage them to listen to this podcast with me or watch this video with me, like that sort of thing. Just like praying over them, praying with them, having calm, honest, gentle conversations that really pulls them in. And asking questions is one of the best things you can do, because if you can ask them questions like, what are you feeling about this? What emotions are coming up? What does it feel like in your body? Why do you think that you're so resistant to this change? Like those sorts of things can kind of get them thinking and maybe get them to open up to you a little bit, and maybe even give them like an aha moment of, oh, like maybe I don't need to feel uncomfortable about this, or maybe, this is just my brain trying to protect me. So those sorts of things. And I've kind of talked about it in other podcasts, but like this is the beginning foundational parts of our coaching curriculum, is that, we walk people through what does the brain naturally do? What is its motivational triad, and what are those like survival type of things that our brain does? How does it hold us back and how can it help us? And, talking about growth mindset, fixed mindset. So, like those things that are just so foundational and really help people get out of those stuck points of like, oh, I don't want change. And like we have to understand these things so that we can go to the next point. It's not that we have to master them necessarily, but just kind of understanding them. So, the other thing I wanted to say is that we need to have the grace, and I kind of said this before, it's just the gentle part of having the conversation is the important part. And I've kind of said this in other episodes too, but just to reiterate, my husband has made it very clear to me that, he needs me to come to him with a gentle, loving attitude. And I know this can be hard, and sometimes we can presuppose things, like presuppose they're going to get upset, or, think that they're going to tell us no before we've even asked the question. And so having those ideas of what they're going to say or how they're going to say it can actually affect the way that we say it to them. And so it's good that we just go in with an open mind, pray before the conversation, go in with a humble heart, just ready to understand. Like, don't go in with the attitude of wanting to get your way. Don't go in with the attitude of changing your spouse. Just go in with the attitude of, I want to understand where they're coming from. And if you do that, then at very least, what you're going to have is something to pray about, right? Because if you can understand where they're coming from, then you know what to pray about. But at the most, you're going to actually understand your spouse better to a level that helps you connect with them more. Because typically when we understand something, it's easier to connect to, and we kind of get that emotional attachment to it if we can understand it. So it helps us connect with our spouse. It helps us understand their point of view, which helps us to be kinder, gentler, and more considerate. It gives us something to pray about. And if we go into it with the desire to understand, then our spouse will feel heard. Our spouse will feel seen. And not only will they be affected by our prayer, which is very powerful, but they'll most likely see an attitude shift in us. They'll see that like we are willing to show up, ask questions, really try to figure out what is their biggest problem with this, why are they resistant, all those types of things. And when we show compassion and we show them like we care and we're here for you, we want to do this as a team, that maybe makes it a little more comfortable for them to lean in. And so even if you don't see that change right away, it can have a lasting impact on your marriage and on your spouse. And so I really encourage you to just make sure that you're going in with the right attitude and the right mindset, and that you are praying through every stage, but especially before you have these conversations with your spouse, especially if they tend to get tense, right? Like, especially if you already know that you have issues with these kind of conversations. So that's something to keep in mind. And we talked about asking questions, but also just adding the attitude piece to that. Asking questions and seeking to understand without judgment. We want to be able to have open communication, and if our spouse feels like we're judging them, then they're not going to be able to open up. And it's very clear when someone is judging you. So don't ever think that you can just hide it. If it's happening in your brain, it's showing up in your body language. And we as humans are very in tune to body language just naturally. So I want you to know that you really do have to control what's going on in your mind. You really do have to have an attitude of grace. And if you can control what's going on in here, then it will show up well in your body language. And that's ultimately the goal here, right? So I needed to add that piece in. Okay. And so we talked about asking, getting curious. Another piece to that is using follow-up questions as a way of saying, hey, I'm listening to you and I care. Because asking the initial question is good, and that, asking questions helps them know that you care and that you want to understand. But also, asking follow-up questions is important, because when you ask a follow-up question that makes sense to what they just said and piggybacks off what they had just responded to, the last question, that tells them, oh, they were listening. Like, they're listening and they actually care. They want to know more. And so the initial question's important, but the follow-up question's almost even more important, to let them know, hey, I'm here. I see you, I hear you, and I want to know. Like, I care. I want to know what you're going through. So that's important to keep in mind. And then you kind of want to try, but don't push, but try to identify those underlying issues. So that's the point of the questions, right? Is we're trying to figure out, why are they really resisting this? Like, is there something deeper behind it? Because obviously we know it's the brain's tendency to not want to change things, and we like habits, and we like to keep doing the same thing we've been doing. A quote that's in our coaching curriculum, it's my favorite. It says, the brain would rather be right than be happy. And that's important to remember, is your brain is trying to keep you safe. And so safe doesn't always equal happy. So that's just something to keep in mind. And so, yeah, we don't want to push them, because we might end up pushing them away. But we do kind of want to help ourselves understand, and kind of get them to the point where they're maybe understanding for themselves what is actually behind this. Is there a deeper reason? And so that's important to keep in mind. And then my last couple things for you is just patience, being compassionate, and compromising. So once you get them to a point where maybe they're a little comfortable, or they give you a little wiggle room in helping with these things, or kind of getting on board, you may not get all the changes that you want at once. And that's okay, because honestly, it's better to start with small little changes, and that will make it easier for your spouse to get on board too. Once you have like one or two little small changes, and they see, oh, this was good, this was positive, this was healthy for us, then they may be more willing to change other things down the road. And taking it just one step at a time is always a good thing. Like I said in the last episode, I am more inclined to just kind of try to do everything, and that almost always ends up being negative for us. Like, we do need those baby steps, and we need the small, manageable changes instead of the big, ginormous ones that we can only keep up with for a week. And so I am kind of a like, cull it and start over type of girl. And there's some things where that's worked for me, but overall, I found that the small, manageable things end up being the ones that last the longest and create the biggest impact. So that's important to keep in mind, and just remembering, to compromise with your spouse. It's a give and take always with marriage. So, and then the last thing, which is if your spouse wants nothing to do with this, if they're like, yeah, no, thank you, my biggest advice to you would be to just start doing little things on your own. So if you're like, maybe you guys haven't been closing the kitchen at night, you haven't been wrapping up dinner dishes and wiping the counters down, like all that last minute stuff, to just reset the kitchen for the next day, and that's something you want to implement, but usually you guys just come home and watch TV together or something, and you're really trying to pull your husband into it, but he doesn't want to, then maybe in this example, you would just get up, either before bed after you laid the kids down, or maybe right after dinner, just get up and do it yourself. And it may feel horrible. Like, if I'm just being honest, it might feel horrible to do it by yourself. There was times when I was starting these changes where I just ended up having to do things by myself. And the mistake I made was that I did them and then I would complain about them because I was so upset that my husband didn't help me. And I really encourage you not to do that, because it causes stress between us. It caused extra stress for him. I mean, he was already stressed about the change. And so me making it harder for him didn't really help the process overall. And so don't complain about it, but do it because there is value in your spouse seeing you do that. I know that, like, me just stepping up and doing things and him seeing the reward of it, with like the house being clean and our mornings going easier and smoother and nicer, like those things showed up, and he started to be able to see that, oh, like these things matter. Like, if we make these small changes, it really will impact our lives. And so I think that really helped him to get on board. And I really encourage you, if you cannot get your spouse on board, they don't want anything to do with this, that's a great place to start. Just pick something small that isn't gonna necessarily cause an argument, or like I'm not saying pick something that they're like, absolutely no, don't do that. But most likely your husband or your wife is not going to complain if you go in and wash the dishes by yourself. Like, usually our spouse would be okay with that. So pick those little things that you can just kind of start implementing yourself, and don't complain about it to them, but maybe talk about like, oh, I started doing this and this is the effect I saw from it. Or you can even ask them questions like, hey, I started doing this. Have you noticed how much better the environment is? Or, something like that. Just to kind of get them thinking about it. And then maybe you can reassess that conversation a little later, once they've had a chance to see how much these things matter to you, how much they matter for the whole family dynamic and the environment of your home. So that is my last piece of advice. I did want to say I have a couples communication guide. I started as just like a document, but we are actually making a video to go with it. So you can click that in the show notes. It's free. You just have to enter your name and your email, and it'll get emailed to you, and then you can click it, and we have a document that you can see on your phone or a computer, a tablet, whatever. And then you can print it off too. So, all right, guys. So go get that. watch the video and read the communication guide. And I'm really excited to be on this journey with you guys and have you here. I honestly just want to say that I don't think that I'm even qualified to be doing this most days. I just know that the Lord asked me to do something and I'm doing it. So any feedback is appreciated here, whether you can just leave it in the form of a review or come over in the Facebook group or Instagram and just let me know what you guys are thinking, because I would love your ideas, love your feedback. So thank you so much for listening to this episode, and I hope that you guys have a great day. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you got so much value out of it. And if you loved this episode, could you do me a quick favor and click 5 stars and leave me a review? It would do wonders for spreading the podcast out to other people who need it, and it only takes a few seconds. If you have an additional few seconds, why don't you go ahead and screenshot the episode and share it to your stories so we can spread the message and get more families healed. Thank you, and until next time, I will be praying for you, and I hope you have a blessed day. Bye.